Going on YouTube, Cloverbells here, back with another Scarlet Violet video, and today I want to talk about the best regulation-I cores to use right now. So once again, we are in the middle of July, and we are still in this lull period of no regionals, right? But again, we're heading closer and closer to the World Championships in August here. So right now we're at a point where we can like take a step back and say, all right, this is where we are. This is what's really, really good right now. This is the core that I want to build around, and then from here it's just all about finding the right partners depending on how I want to build the team. Right now with the cores, again, these are like not full teams, of course, but they're cores for a reason, is because you can start here, and then with these given cores you can add the rest of the team depending on where you want to take the squad, and then from there that will affect how a team is played, because even though they may have 2, 3, or even 4 of the same mons, depending on those last couple of slots or those last moveset ideas, that will affect how you play the squad, despite the fact that there may be some common Pokemon amongst it, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna run through these cores, and then as we go through each core, we'll obviously explain how the core works, but then we can discuss and analyze where you can take the team with this starting core. So you could have like 2 or 3 different builds, with the cores that we're going to discuss here. And then after that, you can kind of think to yourself, okay, based on my playstyle, I'll start with that core, but I'll, add a couple of these options because this is how I like to play, as opposed to playstyle B or playstyle C. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and let's start with some of these Miraidon cores. Okay, for our first Miraidon Ice Rider variation, we'll look at the Iron Hands and Farigiraf as the potential partners here. So when the format first started, or even if you date back to the previous format, Miraidon had a very, very good core with Iron Hands and Farigiraf, right? Because with Miraidon, you're able to bring out terrain, and even though you did have a choice item like a Specs or maybe even an Assault Vest, and you can't protect, which meant you're susceptible to fake out pressure, that's where Farigiraf would come in on pivot and be able to help you out in that regard, so this way you can negate that, right? And then at the same time, Farigiraf was a pretty good Trick Room setter, especially against like the Tailwind teams, and then that also would enable the Iron Hands on the team, which gets enabled by both the Farigiraf and the Miraidon, because now you get Trick Room on your side, and at the same time you're going to get a nice attack boost because of your Port Drive in the electric terrain. All right, now you add the Ice Rider, which is again a very, very dominant, restricted, and now all of a sudden you have a very, very strong Trick Room mode, because now not only do you have the Farigiraf and the Iron Hands, but now you can actually build around these 3 with the Ice Rider, the Iron Hands, and the Farigiraf, right? So you have 2 Trick Room setters, a Fake Out user that can help you set up the Trick Room, and then Miraidon can be like your late game cleaner if you have to do it, right? So this is not the most popular, Ice Rider Miraidon variation right now, but once upon a time it was, and it's still used a little bit more, these days, just not as much as before. It's all about the hype with that Incineroar Amoongus Landorus core that, we featured previously in a team building video on the channel, and that's probably the most popular variant of this core, but these 4, this is still like relatively good. So where do you go from here? So if you're someone that prefers like Tailwind Hyper Offense, this is where you're going to add something like the Whimsicott and still offer coverage for the potential Lunalas and the Shadow Rider matchup, and have something like Chiyu on your side, right? This was always like very standard Miraidon Ice Rider, where the beginning of the format, and then this is still like okay even right now. And sometimes you want to match certain Tailwind modes. This is where this mode comes into play. This will let you outspeed the mirror matchup, especially if it's those Scarf Miraidons running around right now. You under Tailwind will outspeed the Scarf Miraidon, of course. And then the Chiyu is just a little bit more support here, where you can have Snarl and you can have the Choice Scarf here. So that lets you outspeed even more of the Shadow Rider and the Scarf Miraidon teams, because you have Tailwind and the Scarf on your side on your Chiyu. You can Snarl them, make them do less damage, and then from there, once their damage is neutralized, then you can, just go with your big hitters in the end game. So this is another way to play it. But if you're not really a hyper offensive player, that's okay. You can still swap some of these options out, and instead of Whimsicott, you can still go with Grimmsnarl. So now you're going with the screens idea, where now you're going to add a little bit more bulk to your team, right? By having, Reflect and Light Screen, And you're still having a dark type on your team, so you're going to still have access to foul play. But Thunder Wave is also very, very good speed control if that is more up your alley as opposed to Tailwind, because you know Thunder Wave, it stays with you, right? You can't really switch it out. It's still the paralysis stuff will still stay with you there. And then Spirit Break is also very punishing, just like Snarl, where you're able to reduce special attack damage. And then maybe you still want like a very solid win con, and then this is where, you know, options like Volcarona can come into play and start setting up Quiver Dances behind those screens and the fake out pressure, and then Volcarona all of a sudden can be the big damage dealer behind those screens and you know, overwhelm the opponent. And sometimes you know, you don't necessarily need both restricteds if this is the win con that you're liking to play around. So if you're a very adamant Volcarona player, then you know something like this is more up your alley. Otherwise, you can still, you know, keep the Grimmsnarl screens playstyle, and then you can still go with something like this where you have Ogerpon Heartflame. Let's say maybe you like Fake Out and Redirection on your team along with screens, which is great in terms of like adding both to your team and setting up your potential idea for Trick Room. Actually, this is the same 6 that we have at the bottom of our screen, right? So, but yeah, it all starts with that core here, with the Farigiraf and the Iron Hands here. So I think it's still a relatively solid core right now. Again, you know, it's not the Landorus Incineroar Amoongus core that, you know, we're going to touch on very shortly, but it can still get the job done depending on how you look at it. So again, like we said, you know, Whimsicott stuff, Grimmsnarl stuff is still going to work regardless. But whether or not you want that end game win condition, you know, it's really up to you. You can also just play without either the Prankster Pokemon and still add Volcarona and still add something like, you know, Ogerpon Cornerstone. So this way you still have that Fake Out and Redirection support on your team. Sturdy is still like relatively busted, right? It's just like a hidden sash on your team. And this is one way to still enable the Volcarona if you want. Otherwise, you can also go with something like Urshifu damage here, right? The Rapid Strike Urshifu, where, you know, again, you still like that Fake Out Surging Strikes combo because it's so hard to, you know, play against sometimes depending on, you know, the matchups. But Urshifu is still like a very, very good Pokemon to have, right? You know, good breaker damage overall, can go bypass screens, right? Because, you know, Broken Fist is busted, as well as not Broken Fist, I'm sorry. The Surging Strikes critting all the time is what's gonna let you get around that. So if you want to play something like that, that's also like up your alley. And if you really want to, you can also still include, you know, Landorus into this stuff like this, right? And I would imagine something like a Landorus, you know, with that Life Orb idea, along with, you know, maybe one of the Ogerpons here, whether it be, or, you know, Heartflame or the Cornerstone can still work out here. So yeah, if you want to play like this, where like you want that ground type on your team to help you against the mirror matchup, this is again another way to play it. I can also see stuff like the Iron Treads on teams like this, where again, the Treads on these Miraidon teams are always relatively solid. Maybe have another Fake Out Mon here or have another Urshifu here. But if you like Treads on these Miraidon teams, then this is also a way to go about it, right? So anyway, but again, the whole point is notice that, you know, I'm starting with the same 4 here, but depending on how I want to, you know, dictate the rest of the team, that's where, you know, my playstyle comes into play. But either way, I'm still going to have these 4. But what makes the difference in the mirror are those last couple of slots, and obviously some of the movesets that you might have on some of these teams here, right? So let's say you have the Ice Rider, you know, with Grimmsnarl screens. You know, I might be more incentivized to play the the Leech Seed idea, you know, with the leftover stuff, right? But if I'm not going the Grimmsnarl route, then maybe I don't have as much, you know, flexibility and space to be able to, you know, play for that Leech Seed endgame, and instead I may go the more offensive route, like I said, where I'll have non-Grimmsnarl screens, but instead of having leftovers, this is where I'll have the Clear Amulet stuff, and then instead of Leech Seed, I will have the high horsepower concept, right? And that's okay, right? It depends on how you want to play the Calyrex. You know, if you like screens, then you know, Leech Seed is great. I've seen it play without screens, it's okay. But otherwise, I'd rather have like another damaging move here, something like high horsepower, or even something like close combat is still like okay here. All right, but anyway, let's look at another Miraidon Ice Rider core. Next up here, this is the most popular Miraidon Ice Rider core, the Incineroar Amoongus defensive backbone here. So actually, Incineroar Amoongus is a defensive backbone for a lot of different teams, right? It's not even just a restricted format, but, you know, just a format in general. Intimidate, Fake Out, Redirect support, all from 2 mons here. Pivot Potential, of course, with the Parting Shot / U-Turn if you are the Assault Vest variants, which a lot of these are. Okay, but the easy way to take this team is the common 6 that's running around here with the Landers, that solid ground type that you have, and then of course the Urshifu Rapid Strike here to at least give you that Fire, Water, Grass core here. Now, you're not necessarily limited to, these 6, right? It's just the most popular 6 right now. But let's say you wanted to still keep the Incineroar Amoongus backbone, but instead, go a different direction with the last 2 slots, you can definitely do that. So, for example, if you still want that ground type on this team that can fulfill that fast mode role, you can still run with the Iron Treads here. And we've seen this already at the tournament level, from the grassroots that are running around. Of course, I remember some of them on Limitless where they were very successful teams that were just using the Iron Treads overall. Then the Landers, think about it, you're faster, right? Okay, and you could potentially hit harder, if you do have like either the Band or the Life Orb idea. But of course, Sheer Force is also just relatively busted here. But you got a lot of bulk on this thing, right? And just overall, the speed is going to matter a lot. Just the fact that you can outspeed the other Landers, go first and knock it out potentially, or just be that ground type threat that you want on this team that is not a Landers, for example. Now, from here, you can still go with something like the Urshifu and still have that solid water type damage on your team, that solid Fire, Water, Grass core that, a lot of people like. And this is okay, right? So it really just depends on you guys. Do you want that special attacking ground type, or do you want the physical idea with Iron Treads that can also take advantage of Court Drive, in terrain, right? Which is something that Landers cannot do, right? But all in all, it's still fulfilling the same role as the Landers, right? That ground type sweeper, okay? But it really just depends how else do you want to take this squad, right? Now, after this, okay, you may say, you know what, I still want Incin, right? But I also want something that can set up on my team and be a potential sweeper here. So in some cases, they'll, keep the Urshifu, right? But instead, they'll still add Volcarona here. And it might seem weird, right? Where you're adding 2 fire types on the same team, but it's not necessarily weird at all if you think about what the role of each of the fire types is supposed to play, right? Think about some teams that have used Incineroar and Chiyu, for example, on the same team, right? 2 very different Pokemon, 2 very different roles, and even though they have the same type, it'll still work, right? And then, same idea here. Look, you've got Fake Out and Redirection to enable the Volcarona to set up the Quiver Dance. And after that, this once again can become that late game sweeper that you want on a Miraidon, Calyrex, Ice Rider team. Next kind of core is the Miraidon Lunala core that also features the regular Ursaluna, and this is almost like another restricted on the team because you know how strong this thing can be. So what we're saying here is with Lunala, we're going to have Wide Guard support, obviously, and then we're going to have that Bulky Trick Room supportive restricted on the squad here because again, Miraidon being vulnerable to something like Glacial Lance, Lunala can help you in that regard and just say Wide Guard, here it is, now you don't get to click Glacial Lance. And then at the same time, just like the Ice Rider, if you're going against the Tailwind teams, this is where Trick Room is going to be helpful in making sure that they don't get to click that, and at the same time you get to enable one of your sweepers, and instead of something like an Iron Hands or an Ice Rider here, you have yourself, right, the Lunala, and of course here we are, another base speed 50 Pokemon, which is the Ursaluna here. And what's really cool here is you have this Earthquake Wide Guard combination where not only are you're blocking the opponent's spread move damage, but you are also not hurting yourself at the same time because you're clicking Wide Guard and you're clicking Earthquake at the same time too. So that being said, strong, fast special attacker, slow Trick Room setter, with support, and then Trick Room sweeper on the team. This is the core of the squad. Now, just like the first core that we mentioned here, you can still take this a couple directions where you can play a fast mode, right? And you can still add Whimsicott to stuff like this, right? And this is still fine, because again, if you are someone that prefers the Tailwind Trick Room idea, then you can definitely do something like this. And then after that, You can add stuff like Urshifu, the other one, the Rapid Strike one, and then you can add a fire type on this team. Usually it'll be Incineroar. It can still be Chi-Yu, for example, right? But it really depends on how you want to play that last slot. If you want that extra support, to help you set up Trick Room a little bit more and still have, fake out pressure along with Intimidate support and, damage neutralization with Parting Shot, then Incineroar is your guy, right? Otherwise, if you want to play a little bit more faster and a little bit more offensive, rather than, supportive, balance, and damage mitigation, then, obviously Chi-Yu is the better option. And even if you don't like to play, with the Whimsicott, if instead you like the Grimmsnarl idea, the screen support, then of course, then the Grimmsnarl is also favored on something like this, where again, you're relying on screens to make sure all your options are, going to stay on the board here and not get, blown away by all the damage coming around from not only the dual restricteds, but some of the other A-tier staples that are running around in the format. So you can definitely build this way if you like, and then still be very successful depending on how you want to use the squad. Now, again, Grimmsnarl is a great lead here with, either something like Lunala or maybe even something like Urshifu or even Miraidon, for example. But it just depends on where you want to take the team, right? And again, you can even just add that Incineroar Amoongus backbone yet again with the Ursaluna, right? So I can even just go ahead and do that, because remember, this was also a core in itself, before a dual restricted, right? Lunala, Ursaluna, Incineroar Amoongus. It's the same idea as the Ice Rider squad that we've seen before, okay? But instead of the Ice Rider, we still have the Lunala, right? Now, after this, okay, you don't have to play, this wide guard Trick Room idea. You can also play it like this, where now you add Rillaboom on the team, okay? And now Rillaboom all of a sudden can, enable the Lunala, because now what you're saying is, if I have double terrain on my team, that's a little conflicting, right? But what can happen here is now, because you've got Rillaboom and then if you add Incineroar, for example, now we have the two fake out boys on the team, right? And usually that will signal that this is the leftovers Calm Mind Lunala instead of the wide guard Trick Room support. Rather, this will become the late game sweeper. This will be like your Volcarona, more or less, right? Because you're taking the time to alternate between these fake outs and setting up Calm Minds, pivot, U-turn, Parting Shot, protect, and then just, come in and just be super bulky, right? Because you've got physical damage mitigation, with the Incin, and then you can have special attack damage mitigation, when you add the Calm Mind support. So you can definitely play like this, where instead of, just relying on Wide Guard and Trick Room, now Lunala is this offensive threat, especially in the late game, because you have ways to set it up if you add pieces like Incin and Rillaboom on the squad here, right? So, but again, it's still starting, with this key three of Lunala, Ursaluna, and Miraidon here. And, the item itself on Miraidon can vary. Usually the popular one is like the specs, right? But if you don't have the Whimsicott, maybe you go a little bit more bulky and you go something like AV or the Choice Scarf if you really want to. But lots of different directions, depending on how you want to build this squad. Are you a screens guy? Are you that Whimsicott player? Or are you the Calm Mind Lunala player that people have also been picking up as of late in regulationI? I shouldn't say as of late, it's been around for at least a little bit more than a month, right? But it's up to you. How do you want to play the Lunala? Do you want to play it Wide Guard Trick Room, or do you want to play Calm Mind? And from there, that will dictate the rest of your pieces as we show you here. Next core I also want to spotlight here is yet another Miraidon core, but this time it'll involve Terapagos. So it's an offensive threat. It's not a bulky Trick Room setter like a Calyrex Ice Rider or a Miraidon, but it's also featuring a relatively niche Pokemon here that doesn't get a whole lot of playtime, but it has seen playtime as of late on this particular archetype, and that is the Sinistcha over here. So Sinistcha actually is a pretty decent Pokemon, with Terapagos, because again, think about all the fighting moves that, Terapagos doesn't really want to take, stuff like Body Press, Close Combat here. But what's really cool with Sinistcha is it's a Ghost type with Rage Powder, and that means you get to redirect those fighting moves away from the Terapagos and they do no damage because, again, fighting type can't hit ghost type. So it's really cool, and there's some pretty good synergy, believe it or not, with Miraidon and Sinistcha, because what you could do is you could go for something like Volt Switch, hit something, you know, for chip damage, then bring in Sinistcha, which means you get Hospitality activated, which means you get to heal the Pokemon next to the Sinistcha. Sometimes it'll be the Terapagos, sometimes it'll be something else, but it's a pretty cool combination that has been, you know, in recent development here. This will be our next team building video if I haven't mentioned that already, but this is a pretty cool idea. And then after this, the core doesn't offer too much flexibility. You still have this aggressive ground type with the Iron Treads. Where are you? Okay, then you'll have something like Incineroar, and then usually this is always the Urshifu Rapid Strike here, right? So you still have this Fire Water Grass Cork going around with the Sinistcha Instant Ursh idea, so that's also pretty good. But again, you got the Intimidate, the Fake Out, and the Redirector here, just like the Amoongus, okay? But, you know, obviously we're not going for Spore, we're just, you know, relying on the support idea of the Sinistcha. But look at the Pagos here. This is Electric Seed Pagos with Calm Mind, and that's pretty cool. This is a really creative way to play Terapagos, rather than, you know, the stuff like, you know, the Specs idea or still like Calm Mind lefties. This is actually Electric Seed here, which means you're going to get a defense boost. Then you add, you know, stuff like Incin with Intimidate support. Okay, now all of a sudden the Pagos is super bulky on the defensive end, and then you add the special attack damage reduction with Calm Mind, and now all of a sudden the Pagos becomes hard to break, especially when you add the healing ideas of the Sinistcha on this end here. So it's actually pretty cool. But sometimes you don't use the Urshifu. Sometimes I have seen the other water type. It's the Ogerpon Wellspring. And really just depends on the player and how they want to play the squad here. But you get another Redirector on the team, you know, with the Ogerpon, something that can also match up into like another Urshifu or some of those Kyogre games as an example, right? But, you know, this is just another way to play it. Sometimes you'll still go with the Incin, the Urshifu here, right? Where's the Urshifu, right? But instead of the Iron Treads, you'll actually use something like the Iron Valiant instead, right? Another Iron Pokemon. And that means, you know, you value a couple things more on the Valiant side as opposed to the Treads. First of all, you're faster, which is great. But usually this will be something like a Disable Encore set, which is, again, very annoying. This is another way to really neutralize the fighting types that want to put pressure on the Pagos here, if you want to play that regard. And don't forget, this also still gets access to Wide Guard, right? So, you know, if you want a Wide Guard user that's not a restricted, you know, like a Zamazenta or Lunala partnered with Miraidon, Valiant can do that for you. And that's why people use Valiant on these Miraidon teams, because you don't have to commit a restricted slot to have access to Wide Guard on your team. So it really just depends what pieces and how you want to play the squad. But overall, at the very least, you're still going to have these three. And then, you know, just go from there depending on how you want to use your last couple slots. All right, last little Miraidon core here. And again, it also features the Volcarona endgame win condition along with the Zamazenta this time. So we got a Wide Guard user, okay, you know, just like Lunala, okay, but it's a physical option as opposed to a special attack damage reduction. And now Volcarona is, again, that late game sweeper here. However, how you want to take the squad, so what partners well with Zamazenta, it is the Chenpao here. I'm sure you've seen this team multiple times here. And then this will feature stuff like Grimmsnarl, which we've, you know, used before on, you know, this idea with Miraidon, Volcarona, and a restricted here. And then after that, you know, usually it'll have something like an Iron Hands just to be able to round out the slot. This is like one of the better teams running around right now, and something that is expected to be seen, you know, within Worlds in August, right? Because you've got Fake Out Pressure, Screen Support here, all things that you need to be able to enable the Volcarona, and then, you know, stuff like Zamazenta, Chenpao is always just going to be a solid duo, and then Screens Miraidon is also very solid because, again, you could, you know, set up screens, go for a Volt Switch or go for an Electro Drift, and then just from there, once you've got screens set up, Zamazenta and even Iron Hands just become virtually unbreakable. And same thing with Volcarona. You know, if you're having Reflect combined with stuff like Quiver Dance here, so again, physical and special attack damage reduction, Volcarona just becomes relatively unbreakable. this is a great way to utilize this kind of core, right? Very, very balanced. But let's say that you don't want to play the screens idea. That's okay, right? You can still go with, you know, stuff like Whimsicott and Iron Hands yet again, okay? And of course, your last and an unreliable Farigiraf here. So this is more or less like something like this, where you have the Whimsicott, Miraidon, Hands, Farigiraf core, again, like we spoke about in the beginning, and then you just add Volk with that other restricted. You know, we've seen Ice Rider here, but instead you're going to get Zamazenta instead. That's also a possibility, and it still works, right? Just because of how flexible it is. But if you want to go that direction, that is within the realm, obviously. Otherwise, you know, feature the Incineroar Amoongus backbone. Again, the dual fire type, it's still okay because again, 2 different roles on the squad, and then you can still have Chien-Pao here. And now basically instead of Grimmsnarl and others, right, you got this defensive backbone on your team that can help you play the Tricker matchup a little bit easier, right, just because of the spore pressure on the Amoongus. But just be careful, a little bit of the anti-synergy there with the Miraidon. But again, Amoongus is still like very, very good in terms of how you want to play it, right? I have also seen the Cresselia idea, right? And that was actually pretty interesting because Cresselia overall, you know, is susceptible to stuff like Astro Barrage, but not when you partner it with Zamazenta. So what you could do in this case, right, let me remove some of these mons here. You can go this direction where you have that Cresselia concept here, and then you go for stuff like Icy Wind, you know, speed control there. You have access to Thunder Wave, which is what some of these Cresselia teams have been doing. And then you add Lunar Blessing, so you have the healing capability next to Volcarona now, right? And you still have leftovers, okay, of course, along with Quiver Dance and Protect. So, you know, you're going to have healing from both leftovers and the Lunar Blessing, okay? And at the same time, now, this last couple slots here, it just really depends on how you want to do it. You can easily just do Iron Hands here and add the Chien-Pao yet again, right? Because, you know, again, Hands good partner with Miraidon, Chien-Pao good partner with Zamazenta. This actually still works here. So it's almost like the same core that we showed earlier, but instead of something like, you know, Grimmsnarl or Whimsicott, now we're adding Cresselia as an alternate mode, which is kind of funny because, again, that toolkit is something that only Cresselia can do and not another Pokemon. So the familiar niche idea in that sense there. Maybe we can spotlight Cresselia a little bit more later on because it's an interesting idea when you really think about it. It's super annoying because other than the Shadow Rider, you know, it just doesn't really get broken all that easily because of the stats that it has and the healing that it can do, okay? Which, of course, we've seen Cresselia dominate, you know, previous formats in the past, right? But, you know, it just really comes down to how do you want to support this Volcarona but still offer offensive, strong partners, you know, with Zamazenta and Miraidon. That's why I like Iron Hands and Chien-Pao are always like common ideas here. Anytime you have like Miraidon, Zamazenta, you're going to have stuff like Iron Hands and Chien-Pao here just because they have good, they are good partners, you know, with their respective restrictions, right? So that's why I'm gonna actually put it together like this. The Volcarona is actually just that endgame piece, but again, it still does so well in terms of where we are right now. So hopefully you make use of those cores there. But now what we're gonna do is we're gonna move on to like other restricteds because again, all the Miraidon teams, I think we've covered most of the really common good ones right now. So whichever way you seem fit, hopefully I gave you some ideas just in terms of the pieces. But again, I gave you some ideas, you know, Whimsicott versus Grimmsnarl screens, Volcarona endgame, win condition, you know, maybe you add like a fake out mon along with Grimmsnarl screens and redirection support like either the Ogre Pawns or the Amoongus. But you can also go a different direction. You know, if you want that Ursaluna on your team, then you're probably going to have Lunala instead, as opposed to, you know, stuff like Ice Rider or Zamazenta for that matter. But again, what do you want to play? It just really depends, and then that'll dictate the rest of the partners. All right, moving on here. Calyrex, Shadow Rider, Zamazenta, of course, the number one, or okay, I should say arguably the number one dual restricted pairing right now. I think Miraidon and Ice Rider can give it a good run for its money, but right now, what's really propelling these two over the top are some of these support options that we're going to show you here. But Chien-Pao and Raging Bolt are two Pokemon that have taken this archetype to the top. Because remember when regulationI first started, Shadow Rider Zamazenta, although it was like doing relatively well, it wasn't the right build, and it wasn't really doing winning tournaments. It was still like top cutting, but not like super amazing results. It wasn't until options like Raging Bolt was added onto the team that could really do a whole lot here, because what Raging Bolt can do is just look at this. You got priority Thunderclap, obviously, right? Then you have, of course, the Draco Meteor or Dragon Pulse, depending on how you want to do it. But if this is stuff like, Magnet or Booster Energy for a little bit more special attack damage, you're just putting things in range for something like a Shadow Rider or a Zamazenta to pick off, with Astral Barrage or Body Press here, right? Same goes for the Chien-Pao here. Again, priority Sucker Punch is really good. Then you have the Icicle Crash or even the Ice Spinner just to be able to blow up terrain. Okay, and then now all of a sudden Miraidon teams are under pressure. And then obviously the Dark type move, something like Crunch, where you can pressure Lunalas and other Shadow Riders. And now all of a sudden, look at this. Now you've got a really good solid foundation with these 4 here, right? So, and after this, it really, do you want to play Tailwind or not? Because you don't have to play Tailwind, okay? It's just another good option, in the mirror matchup, but you can still play this relatively balanced, right? And other than stuff like Tinglu and Amoongus, this is also like a really good core that has seen success within the last month or so. Again, with Tinglu, you might think it's a little bit anti-synergistic, with the Calyrex Shadow Rider here, but when you think about what it's supposed to do on this team, Sand Tomb, just for trapping and doing occasional chip damage, putting things in range, right? Then you have Runation and Snarl. Like, Runation is big chip damage. Like, this is basically free 50% damage, right? And it breaks Shadow Shield. Okay, then you've got Snarl. Okay, again, more special attack damage reduction. And then this is usually like Stone Edge, for those annoying Volcaronas, right? And then this is something like Assault Vest. So like Tinglu, basically you're setting up the Shadow Rider to finish things off in the end game with all this chip damage, Sand Tomb and Radiation. Then it's a great partner with Zamazenta, because think about it, you've got Dauntless Shield for the physical reduction. Tinglu will give you that special attack damage reduction. And now all of a sudden the Zamazenta is just really hard to break through, right? Both of these are just going to be doing big chip damage as the games go on. And then even when you beat them, now Shadow Rider just comes in the back, cleans up with Astral Barrage, right? So you can play like this. Amoongus gives you that Trick Room matchup. It also helps Tinglu against stuff like, Urshifu and Rillaboom, right? Which Tinglu doesn't like. But again, ground dark typing, excellent, because great matchup into the mirror and also into some of those Miraidon teams that are running around here. But once again, we're featuring another Zamazenta, Chien-Pao, Amoongus pairing, which has always been solid, even in the single restricted format, right? But let's say you don't want to play Tinglu and Amoongus. Let's say you want to do something else. Like, you can still do stuff like Whimsicott here and then have some aggressive fire type. Usually this will be something like a Chi-Yu, for example, right? Or it'll just be something like an Ogerpon here, usually the Heart Flame, and which also combos well with Chien-Pao, because again, Sword of Ruin works, with the Ogerpon. You can play that way if you want, or you can have just the Amoongus, right? And then you can go with Rillaboom here, the double grass core, which is used on some teams, right? Because again, Amoongus can't spore in Miraidon's terrain, but you can do it if you switch in Rillaboom, and then you can spore that thing. So if you want to play that, you can definitely do that. Otherwise, you can just go with Old Reliable here and just add Incineroar and Amoongus for that solid defensive backbone. And now what you're able to do, with something like a Calyrex is, because you have the Intimidate and Fake Out, now you can go with the Nasty Plot idea, which you could also do technically with the Ogerpon concept as well, but you still want the space to be able to set up, and this will in fact give you set space here, right? Now after this, if you don't want to use the Chien-Pao / Raging Bull, if you want to just use one of them or maybe none of them, that's where other pairings are going to come into play. But you can always just add like Chien-Pao, Tornadus, right? Or Urshifu here. This is like one of the more starting cores here. This is where like some struggling happened, right? But you can still do it like this if you really want to. But I still think something like a Whimsicott is going to be necessary here, or a Tornado. Oh, not Tornado. I'm sorry. We already had the Tornadus, but I think that this is already like okay. And then maybe you add something like an Amoongus for The grass Trick Room matchup, this is like okay, but not the best core, but still very much playable if you like something like this. Otherwise, you know, I think the other cores were much better here. But let's look at some other pairings with Shadow Rider Zamazenta, because there's some pretty cool support options besides the Chenpao and the Raging Bolt. Okay, now let's add Smeargle here. And now things get a little bit interesting, because now you have a decision to make, because Zamazenta does get Wide Guard, but so does Smeargle. And now you have to ask yourself, okay, do I want 2 Wide Guard users on my team? The answer is usually going to be no. If this is going to run Wide Guard, then this is going to run something else. But here's the idea. You've got Fake Out now, just like Incineroar and Rillaboom, okay? Then you've got Spore, and you've got Follow Me. And only Smeargle can really do this, which is kind of funny when you think about it. And then what's really going to separate Smeargle with everything else, you know, stuff like Amoongus and the Ogrepons, is this move here, Decorate. And then you're just going to be super annoying with the Focus Sash, so you're going to need 2 attacks there. And now, all of a sudden, free setup for the Calyrex, right? Because if this is Life Orb, you don't necessarily need to only rely on Nasty Plot to get that +2. Now you can Decorate yourself and just, you know, go berserk from that end and not have to go for Nasty Plot if you don't have to, right? And Smeargle is the only one that can really do this. This is usually the set that you're going to do if you have Zamazenta on your side. And that's okay, right? Because now from here, where do you want to take the squad? You can still have stuff like Incin and Rillaboom, okay, for the Fake Out pressure, right? So now you got 3 Fake Out mods, which again gives you a lot of space to set up this Nasty Plot here. This last slot here is up for grabs. It really just depends on the user. You have access to Raging Bolt if you really want to do that. Otherwise, you can still have, Smeargle and Raging Bolt here, but maybe go a little bit away from the balance stuff and just go a little bit more offensive. And you have stuff like Tornadus here, where you can have the Tailwind mode on your side, and then still have access to Rillaboom just to give you a little bit more control in terms of terrain and a secondary Fake Out user on your team. So you can definitely play like this, which again, Tornadus is still very, very good, especially when you have access to Prankster Taunt, ideally. And then, of course, Tailwind, like you know, is just super strong. Bleak Wind Storm, the spread move, flying damage, and then you can also have weather control with something like Rain Dance if you want to play like that. But again, really, really cool. So like balance way, or you have the hyper offensive way like this, if that's more of your play style there. But I think those are like the more consistent ideas. Otherwise, you can do some niche idea like this, where instead of Rillaboom, you can still keep the Smeargle, but you can go for something like the Indeedee, right? Or for that kind of terrain control. And you don't have to necessarily go for Nasty Plot. You can still have this Follow Me Trick Room idea, right? If you want to play the mirror that way and say, instead of clicking Tailwind, I want to click Trick Room. You can do that, and then you still have access to terrain control, you know, with Psychic Surge. And then after this, you can still keep the Tornadus idea, where you can play the Tailwind Tail Room idea if that is something that you really want to do, and then add something here. It could be Urshifu, right? It could be Ogrepon. It could even be Chenpao for that matter, if you really want to play it like that. But this is also definitely possible if you want to play like this. But Smeargle, great Pokemon here. With these two, as is the Raging Bolt and the Chenpao there. I think it makes all the difference in terms of like being able to enable the Calyrex, right? And don't forget, you still have a Zamazenta on your team, okay? It's not chopped liver, right? You're still able to do a lot of damage. And even the Raging Bolt, right? If you can decorate Raging Bolt, like +2 or +3 Raging Bolt with a Magnet or a Booster Energy is just going to do so much damage, you know, with those Thunderclaps. So don't disregard that yet, right? At that point, the Raging Bolt is the restricted if you're just able to decorate it like that. So just be mindful of it, but these are just always good partners. Okay, next kind of pairing here. So we're sticking with Calyrex Shadow Rider here, but different fighting type instead of Zamazenta. Let's go Koraidon here. And now what we're asking in terms of Koraidon is, can I have some Protosynthesis Mons that can get enabled by the weather that I'm having here, right? But at the same time, now we're also bringing out the Weezing here, which means if you're going to do this, then more times often than not, you're going to have the Clear Amulet as opposed to, I'm sorry, not the Clear Amulet, the Ability Shield as opposed to the Life Orb or the Clear Amulet. So this way you get to have your weather, but the opponent cannot. And then at the same time, Weezing, with Neutralizing Gas, you're just able to take away abilities right? Which is great because that means no Intimidate, no Prankster stuff. And then at the same time, you have access to Poison Gas. So if you really want to play this way, then what you're saying is I'm going to chip everything down, let everything lose health, and then Shadow Rider is going to come in and finish things off after everything has taken a bunch of chip damage, right? But there are some players that don't want to play the Poison Gas just because it's a little bit, you know, limiting in terms of the damage that you're able to do. Not that you're playing Weezing for the damage stuff, but you know, you don't have to play that. You can always go stuff like Toxic Spikes and just go with, you know, Strange Theme, Taunt, and Will-O-Wisp are usually like really good moves that you want on the Weezing. All right, and then just something like, like this, right? This is another set that you can definitely do if you want to go that direction. Otherwise, you could even take out either Taunt or Will-O-Wisp and just put in the Poison Gas. Now, that being said, where do you want to take it from here? Usually, Chi-Yu comes onto teams like this just because Chi-Yu looks great with Shadow Rider, you know, letting it do more damage, and looks great with Koraidon because Sun lets it do a little bit more fire damage, okay? And then after this, the easy way is just to slap on Dondozo and Tatsugiri, right? Just because there's not a whole lot of checks to both of these right now. There's no Amoongus, you know, Clear Smog. There's no Haze, you know, Pokemon running around here. But there are tools that you can use to deal with Dondozo Tatsugiri, especially when you have a second restricted where you're going to have 2 slots dealing out big damage, whereas Dondozo and the Tatsugiri combo makes it so that you're limited to just 1, right? And that's why overall hasn't had so much success, but not a lot of checks. If you pilot it well, it can win you a whole tournament, right? So you have to be aware of that. But if you don't want to play Dondozo Tatsugiri, you don't have to. There's other ways that you can play this. You can add stuff like Brute Bonded here, which is very good. And then stuff like Flutter Mane, right? It's just another good Protosynthesis mod to have here. If you don't like the dual ghost type, then you can just easily add Raging Bolt over here, right? But, you know, Brute Bonnet gives you that flexibility, you know, in Trick Room, especially when you add items like Room Service Brute Bonnet, which is kind of funny. That gives you the edge in the Trick Room matchup. Otherwise, you're just going to use, you know, Rocky Helmet or, you know, the Mental Herb idea on the Brute Bonnet. That's also great. And then, of course, Raging Bolt just gets enabled by Koraidon, along with Chi-Yu as well. So you can definitely play something like this if you want to. Otherwise, you know, you might not even want to play the Weezing anyway, right? You don't have to, right? You can definitely play this without it. But again, which is good because then you can replace it with some other ideas that you want to use with the Shadow Rider Koraidon. But you can still keep the Chi-Yu, Raging Bolt, Brute Bonnet stuff. That much is not going to change. But if you want to play the non-Weezing direction, then these are the ideas that you can do. I still think like a terrain setter can be like pretty good with stuff like this. So you could even still add stuff like Indeedee over here, right? And by the way, because you don't have the Weezing anymore, that does allow you to play the Koraidon with stuff like Life Orb / the Clear Amulet idea. I think that also works out relatively well. And then if you want, you can also just play this a little bit more hyper offensive and then just go with something like Tornadus over here or even like Whimsicott in this case. And this is just another way to play around it. But usually a lot of these cores, they're going to have the Galarian-Weezing if you're going to play like the Koraidon, Calyrex, Shadow Rider stuff. But again, you're not just only limited to it, but it is the most popular variation. I just think that the easy thing to do is just keep the Weezing and remove the Dondozo Tatsugiri stuff. I don't think that much is necessary. But if you want to go with something like this, then you can definitely add like Chi-Yu, Flutter Mane stuff. Where are you? Yeah, along with Tornadus, this has always been like a really good like hyper offensive core. And then you could add stuff like Indeedee over here. Not that one, the other one, where you now have an idea for Trick Room and you have terrain control in itself. And this is basically like a hyper offensive team. So you can definitely do this. I don't recommend this idea per se. Like it's still like, okay, it's not as good as like some of the other cores that I showed you with this pairing. But it still definitely works if you really want to, you know, take a different direction besides the Weezing stuff. Okay, this is another very famous, well-known core right now. It's this Pagos Shadow Rider idea. And usually the Pagos on these teams, they're going to be running Choice Specs. They're going to be like super offensive. And then at the same time, you're going to have Whimsicott, which gives you Tailwind. And then at the same time, Fake Tears. So if you want to play the team like this, this is another strong core. And now, because you have options for Decorate, look how hard you're hitting with both the Shadow Rider and the Specs Pagos, right? You're not relying on slow, boring Calm Mind setup. All right, I want immediate damage right? And you know, Smeargle can do that for you, and you still get Follow Me, right? And you still get, you know, Spore and stuff, and then you also still get Fake Out, right? So you can, this is still like on the table here. And then Chiyu is just an easy Pokemon to add to stuff like this, because Chiyu gives a little bit of help to both of these, especially into the mirror matchup where you can snarl both of these, right? Snarl the Miraidons for that matter. Another benefit for fake tier support. And then this last slot here, it could be anything. Usually this thing right now is an Iron Hands. All right, it doesn't have to be an Iron Hands, right? But that is one option here, and that'll give you a decent Trick Room matchup, right? You know, just to have something slow and bulky. Otherwise, you can always just add stuff like Urshifu Rapid Strike here. Again, just more instant offense where you can definitely do that. That's also within the realm. Otherwise, you know, if you want to, you know, just abandon the Smeargle idea altogether, you can definitely do that and just play the other more slow, boring way where you have the call. You actually do have the Calm Mind setup. So you can have the leftovers, right? You can go back to Calm Mind ideas, right? But then you're just adding Incin, Rillaboom, okay? Maybe an Ogerpon over here, right? Usually it's the cornerstone, sometimes the other one, but you know, if I've got Incin and Amoongus already, right, this is already like pretty good. And then this last slot here, it doesn't have to be Urshifu. I've also seen stuff like Fluttermane over here with Icy Wind and Thunder Wave support. Like this is your speed control mod as opposed to something like Tornadus. You can definitely play like this, which will affect the way the Pagos plays, because now you're not instant offense plex. Now you're slow, boring setup, Calm Mind set. Listen, I got nothing wrong about Calm Mind setup here. I love Calm Mind, but you know, it's just you've seen this for years, and it's just like, can I do something else, right? And that's why people like the specs build. But you know, you can play the Pagos this way if you don't want to do the Smeargle route. Otherwise, that idea with, you know, fake tiers, Whimsicott, Chiyu over there, just instant offense, is just all catered to both of these restrictors. How can I make these two do more damage, right? That's what the other build was speaking about with the Decorate and the Chiyu ideas and the fake tier support, right? All of that is just, how do I make these two do more damage that they already do? All right, how about some of the Kyogre stuff now? So usually SwordFish is the go-to Kyogre team at the moment. The other one being like the Ice Rider stuff, which is also starting to rise a little bit more. But this is something that has been pretty well established, you know, even since Sword and Shield, right? So strong Steel type in the rain, which is what we're doing here. And then at the same time, Zacian is going to put on pressure against stuff like Raging Bolt and Rillaboom, which Kyogre doesn't really want to see. Then from here, you have this Dark type with Tailwind support as opposed to something like a Tornadus. So you can put pressure on the Rillabooms and the Ogerpons for that matter, and then give yourself Tailwind, which is really nice. And then at the same time, you are a Dark type, so you can pressure those Lunalas and those Calyrexes for that matter, right? And then you add Amoongus just to give you that Trick Room support that you can play in that Trick Room idea. So this is already a core. And then from here, you can take the team however you want. If you want a little bit more physical breaker damage, you can go with the Urshifu Rapid Strike, common partner with these Kyogre teams. And then this is always something like the Iron Hands. Again, another bulky Trick Room offensive mon that can, you know, dish out good damage, especially in that Ice Rider matchup. You know, when you have the low kick idea into it, it's going to do like 50%. Such a hard hitting Pokemon here. So this is one way to do it. Otherwise, you can always do stuff like Chenpao-zation along with Urshifu. That's also worked relatively well. So if you want to go in that direction, you can do that. And even like Roaring Moon here, you don't even have to do this. You can even do like Iron Jugula stuff where you don't want to have too many physical attackers on the team where you're Intimidate cycled, right? This will still give you that support, you know, Tailwind as well, along with Snarl, right? Which is great, right? It's a little bit more damage reduction. So if you want to go this direction, you can definitely do that. But either way, you know, whether you do Roaring Moon or not, I think you still need that Dark type on the team, which Iron Jigulish Roaring Moon can definitely do that for you, along with the Chenpao. Ursh is just good breaker damage in the rain, but really what it comes down to is this, right? So Kyogre-zation, Iron Jigulish Roaring Moon, okay, and then the Amoongus, and then these last two slots are really up for grabs. They're very flexible in how you want to do it. I just gave you some of the more common ideas. There's a couple more there, but these are the more dominant ones right now. This is another core that I think is on the rise as of late. This Ice Rider Kyogre duo, but not like the Iron Jigulis Amoongus stuff. I think I've seen them start to add Smeargle, right? Everything is adding Smeargle now, man. It's just the support that it gives you is just super strong. Obviously, you know what you're getting with Decorate. The spam stuff with Glacial Lance, that's also a given. But now think about decorating your own Kyogre, right? And now all of a sudden these water spouts are hitting super hard. That's Waterfall. Where are your water spout, right? These Origin Pulses are hitting super hard. Thunder is all of a sudden hitting super hard. And that's not good, right? Right. But again, Smeargle with Fake Out. Okay, then you got Spore, and then Follow Me, right? Yeah, the Redirector. So you can definitely play this. And then from here, give me classic, all reliable Incineroar Amoongus defensive backbone. And then I don't need Tailwind support here because this is a Trick Room Kyogre team, so I don't need stuff like Iron Jugulis and Roaring Moon here. Instead, I can go a different direction and say, you know what, I've got Kyogre. How about Landorus? Landorus has always been a solid partner with Kyogre because, again, good synergy in the rain, you know, it stands your Storm. All right, it's also great against Raging Bolt, great against, you know, Miraidon stuff and Iron Hands, things that Kyogre doesn't want to deal with. And then, of course, you got Sludge Bomb for the Rillabooms, and then of course you have just straight up Earth Power and then Protect here. Roleplay, whoa, what is that move? How did I go from Protect to Roleplay? That was very interesting. Anyway, so you could definitely do something like this. This is like one build. In fact, you can almost turn this into like a rental team, right? I guess I could do that, you know, at some point, you know, later this week. This is already a good build, but there is another build that I thought was like actually relatively interesting that still uses the Smeargle, and along with the Landorus, it's this. So you can definitely still stick to these ideas, but look at this. How about instead of like you know, Mystic Water Knot, you add Power Lens. I saw this in the Limiters tournament. I thought it was kind of funny when you think about it, right? Hold their speed is half, right? So you could go like Quiet Ogre, for example, right? Let me just put this as Quiet here, and just like no EVs in speed, like 0. Or 0, yeah. You can just do this, right? And now all of a sudden, look, I'm at 85 speed. If I got Power Lens, right, in Trick Room, okay, this thing is slower than another Ice Rider, right? Unless, you know, even, they would have to be like even Brave for that matter, but even then, that's not enough, right? So this is actually kind of funny. I can have like slow Power Lens Kyogre, which is kind of funny, and then just have these guys, and then after this, you could still add Incineroar Amoongus defensive backbone. I've seen Urshifu still on teams like this because, again, Urshifu is just really strong with Kyogre here. And then this ends up being like the Choice Scarf Fast Mode Pokemon on the team. But I just thought this was like relatively interesting when I saw it. And then even like the Smeargle, you can still have Wide Guard here if you really want to. But I just think, you know, Follow Me, Fake Out, and Spore is just really good, right? Even if you don't want to go the Decorate route, you can still do Wide Guard here and really cripple the opponent here. But I just think like this core is also just really good. You know, if you don't like the other one, then this one is still like okay. But I think Kyogre Ice Rider, you know, needs still more exploration. I don't think we figured everything out yet, and thankfully, you know, there's still like a month away till Worlds. But those two builds, I think right now are definitely worth using and playing right now. You know, just overall, I think I could even turn into like a team building video, right? Just like those two archetypes that I just showed you, just because, you know, I've seen them, they did well, and there were interesting ideas, and I think moving forward, people are going to flesh out those ideas a little bit more. And then even besides this, there's even like a third variation running around that doesn't even like use Smeargle. I've also seen this, but still uses these guys. You can go back to like Mystic Water stuff, but you still have Amoongus, right? It's just double Grass Core with like Rillaboom, right? And then they also feature, what's that thing called? The Basculegion instead of like the Urshifu for that matter, right? We've seen something like this before, where this ends up being like the cleaner as opposed to something like Urshifu. And this in itself is also really kind of funny, right? And then what they're doing now with Fluttermane, they're doing some interesting things here, right? So I've seen some like Trick Room Fluttermanes, right? I've also seen like Taunt on this, along with the Icy Wind stuff, right? And not that Taunt is like unusual, but it's not as common. You know, you can still have Protect here if you really want to, but you still need a single target for a move here. But this was also like another interesting idea, right? You don't have to necessarily use the Fluttermane. At the very least, these three were like pretty good. But this was kind of funny when I saw it here. Again, you don't need Tailwind on this. You can if you want to. It's not necessary. And it is something that we've seen like in some of the other like grassroots tours. just with like the Flutter Mane onto these Kyogre teams. I just think it's a little bit interesting when you think about it, but it's really, really good. I was trying it out myself, like the flexibility that I have, with like Amoongus Ice Rider or like Amoongus Kyogre, and then just being able to have instant offense like Kyogre Basculegion, right? Where you can nuke something and then switch out Ogre if it's something is really threatening and then just go from there. I think it's really, really solid. Other ideas are also like, with just Amoongus Instant defensive backbone yet again. Now, the Choice Specs Flutter Mane was something that was also relatively interesting on these teams. But you can also play the Assault Vest Ogre, right? Where you have like Water Spout and Origin Pulse and play this thing like relatively bulky and then still have access to Thunder and Ice Beam. Right, you can definitely do that. Otherwise, you can just have something like Hydro Pump here where you can have like 3 water attacks. And then what you can also have here is just straight up Urshifu, like again, another Fire, Water, Grass Courier, even though you already have it with Kyogre. I think this is another way to kind of explore if you really like that. I think the specs idea, as opposed to Sash, it does offer something, right? And then even like this is also like pretty good, building with just Instant and Amoongus along with Ice Rider. Then you add Raging Bolt, right? Remember Bolt Beam coverage, guys. Electric and Ice attacks are a match made in heaven. You can definitely play this. And then you could just add this, like Grimmsnarl here. But this ends up being somewhat passive just because you have Instant Amoongus and Grimmsnarl. So you don't have to play it like that. Otherwise, you can just go with Instant Amoongus, Raging Bolt, and then have, the Flutter Mane, with that specs. Like that is still like a pretty good idea. But I still think, some more fleshing out needs to be done, with the Kyogre Ice Rider idea. But at the very least, the other cores with Smeargle are just really, really good. And I think if you're going to build something a little bit more modern right now, I just think the Smeargle builds that I was showing you earlier are the way to go right now. And, start with those 3. And then after that, dictate the squad depending on how you want to play it. All right, so that's it. Those are what we think are the best cores right now. Again, a lot of Miraidon and a lot of Shadow Rider, okay? And that's fine, but Miraidon's so flexible with a lot of pairings. Again, Lunala makes sense. Ice Rider makes sense. Zamazenta makes sense. Okay, now you've got the other ideas like Terapagos that you can play with Miraidon now. I've even seen like some Miraidon Shadow Rider teams start to rise a little bit. Okay, and then Shadow Rider itself, like again, a strong fighting type is just always good. Zamazenta is the clear-cut murder right now, along with sometimes the occasional Koraidon builds. That's also pretty solid. And then SwordFish can kind of just sneak in there a little bit. All right. Now, other cores, stuff like Miraidon Ho-Oh, for example. Like here, I'll just even put that over here. Like Miraidon Ho-Oh can still be good, in my opinion. I just think the build needs to be modernized a little bit more. But I do like this pairing, okay? Now, you can go with the Grimmsnarl screens, okay? And you still can go with Iron Hands. I think this is, like, okay. But I just think maybe even something like the Sinistcha on builds like this, right? Because, again, I think Sinistcha, combos well with Ho-Oh. Just because with Regenerator, you switch out Ho-Oh, then you bring in Sinistcha. And, Ho-Oh gets healing. And then whatever Sinistcha comes in next to will also get healing. So it's like 2 Pokemon getting healing on the same turn. And then you can still add Iron Hands to stuff like this, right, where you still have Fake Out Pressure to enable your Tailwind ideas. So I think something like this is still pretty good. We saw this from Castia, I believe, when he took like a really, really long break and then came back and did this. So maybe the team needs to be also modernized in this sense, but I still like this 4-man core. I still think this could be like relatively good. But depending on these last couple mons here, it really just depends on you and how you want to play it. But at the very least, this core is very good as of, today, mid-July. All right, so hopefully you liked our little lesson on, the top cores here. So hopefully we've inspired a little bit more team building as far as like, your regulation I needs. If this is still something you need help with, sign up for coaching on the channel. Tier 3 sub gets you a one-on-one team building session with me where we get to hash out a lot of these cores, complete the cores, create complete EV spreads. All of that will be done one-on-one if you choose to do coaching with me. If you look in the video description below, there is a link to join the channel with the pinned comment section as well, providing the same link. So 2 different places where you can get it, either in the description or in the pinned comment section. Tier 3 gets you that one-on-one meeting. If you want that, along with help in terms of battling, that's where Tier 4 comes into play. So you can definitely explore that route where I get to look at your games and I get to help give you feedback just to improve your your gameplay and your ladder needs. Otherwise, if you're just more looking for tournaments, then we can definitely assist you in the team building process as we see fit. All right, so sign up and definitely join the Discord if you can. That's also linked in the video description below. It's also linked in every single video that I have here, you know, credentials down there, right? You can see underneath my camera. But yeah, hopefully this paints more of the regulationI picture where we are right now in mid-July. And, you know, again, Worlds is getting closer. There's still tons of grassroots tournaments happening. Victory Road is having a tour every weekend. We just had another near 200-person trainer school tournament wrap up on Limitless. So, you know, you can't say there's no practice available, right? There's lots of things going on. You just have to open your eyes a little bit and search and join these things. All right, but that's it for now, folks. We'll be back with another video in the next one. Peace out and have a good one.